Captain Jake Morrison opened his eyes to the familiar sound of 17 different alien species arguing in what could generously be called harmony, and less generously be called the worst choir in galactic history. The cryopod hissed open, releasing him into a universe that had apparently decided to have an apocalypse while he was napping. Finally, Commander Vex practically vibrated with relief, his purple skin shifting through about 12 shades of anxiety. Captain Morrison, thank the cosmic void you're awake. The Dominion Empire has conquered 90% of known space. Their war machines are unstoppable. Entire civilizations are fleeing in terror. The galaxy is doomed. Jake stretched, popped his neck, and looked around the rescue ship's cramped quarters. Ha! What day is it? What day? Vex's antennae twitched violently. Captain, it's been 3 standard months since the invasion began. Billions are dead. The universe as we know it is ending. Right, but like what day of the week? If Vex had possessed human facial expressions, this would have been the moment for the 1,000-yard stare. Instead, his translator implant made a sound like a dial-up modem having an existential crisis. It's Tuesday? Explains a lot. Tuesdays are always rough. Jake wandered over to the food dispenser, which immediately broke upon contact with his coffee selection. He sighed and gave it a gentle tap that somehow caused it to not only fix itself but also upgrade its brewing capacity by roughly 300%. Vex watched this casual miracle with the expression of someone whose understanding of physics had just filed for divorce. How did you? Was probably just tired. Happens to the best of us. Jake took a sip of coffee that was somehow perfect despite being made by a machine that had been broken 30 seconds earlier. So, this Dominion Empire. They're the ones with the pointy ships and the dramatic speeches about conquest? Yes, Emperor Kraxx has been broadcasting surrender demands across all frequencies. His forces have technology beyond our comprehension. Energy weapons that phase through our shields, ships that repair themselves, tactical AI that predicts our movements before we make them. Jake nodded thoughtfully. Sounds annoying. Annoying? Vex's voice cracked. Captain, they destroyed the Centauri defense fleet in under 6 minutes. 6 minutes. That fleet had been considered invincible for 2 centuries. Well, there's your problem right there. Never call anything invincible. It's like naming a ship unsinkable or calling a plan foolproof. You're just asking the universe to prove you wrong. Jake finished his coffee and looked around for somewhere to put the cup. Finding none, he casually tossed it toward what appeared to be a solid wall. The cup disappeared through the wall like it wasn't there. Vex stared at the wall, then at Jake, then back at the wall. That was solid durasteel plating. Was it? Huh. Jake shrugged. Anyway, I assume you didn't wake me up just to chat about Tuesday and poorly named fleets. What's the plan? Plan? Vex's laugh bordered on hysteria. Captain, we don't have a plan. That's why we're here. The Galactic Council sent me to find humanity's greatest military mind, their most dangerous warrior, their ultimate weapon against impossible odds. Jake looked around the empty room. And that's you. There was a long pause. Jake scratched his head, yawned, and then started laughing. Not the evil laugh of a mastermind or the bitter laugh of despair, but the genuine chuckle of someone who'd just heard a really good joke. Oh man, you guys are really desperate, aren't you? The Galactic Council chamber looked exactly like what you'd expect when 17 different species try to agree on interior decorating. A magnificent disaster of competing aesthetics that somehow managed to be both garish and boring simultaneously. President Thorne, whose insectoid features made him look like a praying mantis that had gone to law school, gestured dramatically with 4 of his 6 arms. Behold, Captain Morrison, the assembled representatives of the free galaxy. His voice carried the kind of theatrical weight usually reserved for Shakespearean soliloquies and infomercials. Neat, Jake said, settling into a chair that immediately adjusted itself to his physiology despite being designed for beings with entirely different skeletal structures. Dr. Kelpin, a tentacled scientist whose species had mastered quantum mechanics before humans had figured out fire, leaned forward nervously. Captain, we've reviewed your species' technological capabilities. While quaint, we're not entirely certain how you might contribute to our war effort. Quaint? Jake raised an eyebrow. That's a new one. Admiral Zephyr, whose crystalline body refracted light in patterns that hurt to look at directly, chimed in with the sound of wind through crystal caves. No offense intended, Captain. Your species has made admirable progress for such a young civilization, mastering nuclear fusion, primitive AI, chemical rockets. Very impressive for beings who only recently discovered electricity. Recently being about 200 years ago, but who's counting? Jake muttered. President Thorne pulled up a holographic display showing Earth's technological timeline. Yes, well, when you consider that most council species had mastered interstellar travel before your planet had multicellular life, your rapid advancement is quite remarkable. Thanks, I guess? The display showed humanity's greatest achievements, landing on their moon, curing diseases, creating global communication networks. To the assembled aliens, it looked like a child's finger painting next to the Sistine Chapel. Dr. Kelpin's tentacles writhed apologetically. We don't mean to diminish your accomplishments, Captain. It's just that the Dominion Empire possesses technology that operates on principles we're only beginning to understand. They manipulate space-time itself, create matter from pure energy. And their computational systems process information faster than light can travel. Wow, faster than light information processing. Jake paused, appearing to consider this seriously. Actually, that's pretty basic stuff. The room fell silent except for the ambient hum of life support systems and what sounded like Admiral Zephyr's crystalline equivalent of a cough. Basic? President Thorne's mandibles clicked nervously. Well, yeah, quantum entanglement has been allowing instant information transfer regardless of distance since forever, really. The universe has been doing it since the Big Bang. You just have to know how to ask nicely. Jake stood up and walked over to the chamber's primary computer console, which was currently displaying error messages in 17 different languages after failing to process the Dominion's latest tactical data. The alien technicians had been working on it for 3 days. Mind if I take a look? Before anyone could answer, Jake had already started poking at the interface. But within 30 seconds, the error messages disappeared. Within a minute, the system was running diagnostics on itself and finding improvements nobody had thought to ask for. Within 2 minutes, it had solved the tactical analysis problem and was offering to reorganize the entire chamber's database for better efficiency. How? Dr. Kelpin whispered. Oh, the quantum processor was running backwards. Happens all the time with these models. You just have to reverse the polarity of the temporal flux coupling and recalibrate the Jake noticed their stares. Actually, you know what? Never mind the technical stuff. Point is, it's working now. Admiral Zephyr's light patterns had shifted to colors that didn't have names in any known language. Captain Morrison, that console contains technology that represents the pinnacle of 12 different civilizations' scientific achievement. Cool. It also had a loose wire. So, Jake said, settling back into his mysteriously comfortable chair, you want to know about human military strategy? President Thorne nodded eagerly. The Council has analyzed your historical conflicts, but we must admit, your warfare seems rather primitive. Kinetic weapons, explosive devices, chemical propellants. We're curious how such methods might apply to modern space combat. Jake grinned. Well, let's start with the basics. See, humans have this weird relationship with violence. We don't really like it, which is why we've gotten so good at ending fights quickly. Dr. Kelpin's tentacles curled in confusion. Ending fights quickly? But your wars have lasted years, sometimes decades. Oh, those weren't wars. Those were arguments. When humans actually go to war, things tend to wrap up pretty fast. Jake gestured to the holographic display. Mind if I show you a few examples? The display flickered and suddenly showed Earth's history, but from a perspective none of the aliens had seen before. Instead of the primitive conflicts they'd observed, they saw pattern recognition, tactical evolution, and technological acceleration that made their heads spin. Here's the thing about humans, Jake continued conversationally. We're really lazy. I mean, seriously lazy. So when someone forces us to fight, our first instinct is always, how do we make this problem go away with the least amount of effort? The display showed the progression from sticks and stones to gunpowder to nuclear weapons. Took us about 10,000 years to go from hitting each other with rocks to splitting atoms. Not bad for a species that mostly just wants to nap and eat snacks. Admiral Zephyr's crystalline form was practically vibrating. Captain, are you saying humans developed weapons of mass destruction out of laziness? Oh, absolutely. You know how much work it is to conquer a planet the old-fashioned way? All that marching around, occupying territory, managing supply lines. Way too much effort. Much easier to just convince everyone that fighting is a bad idea. The holographic display shifted to show more recent human innovations, technologies that the aliens had somehow missed in their surveys. Theoretical weapons that existed only in human military archives, labeled as concepts we really hope we never have to build. Wait, Dr. Kelpin said, his voice rising several octaves. These schematics, this is technology that shouldn't be possible with your industrial capacity. Oh, that's just conceptual stuff. We haven't actually built any of that. Jake waved dismissively. Well, except for the planet crackers. But those are just for mining asteroids. And maybe the reality editors, but we only use those for theoretical physics experiments. Oh, and there's the time dilators, but those are just for keeping food fresh. The silence in the chamber was so complete that you could hear the cosmic background radiation. President Thorne finally found his voice. Planet crackers? Yeah, you know, for breaking up really big asteroids for mining. Though I guess if you pointed one at a planet, it would probably crack that too. Hence the name. Jake shrugged. But like I said, we haven't had to use any of this stuff. Most problems sort themselves out once people realize humans are involved. A communication alert chimed, and Lieutenant Emma Rodriguez appeared as a hologram. She was grinning the kind of grin that made experienced soldiers check their insurance policies. Hey, Captain, heard we're having a war. Please tell me I get to test the new toys. Hi, Emma. These are our new alien friends. They're being invaded by someone with supposedly superior technology. Emma's grin widened. Superior technology? Oh, this is going to be fun. Captain, can I show them the Creative Solutions catalog? Let's not traumatize them just yet, Lieutenant. Aw, come on. Just the non-classified stuff? The really scary things are still theoretical anyway. Jake looked at the assembled aliens, whose various forms of facial expressions all conveyed the same message, growing existential dread. Maybe later, Emma. Right now we're still in the gentle introduction phase. Gentle? Admiral Zephyr asked weakly. Don't worry, Jake said reassuringly. Humans are very gentle. We always try diplomacy first. And if diplomacy doesn't work? President Thorne asked. Jake's smile was perfectly pleasant and absolutely terrifying. Then we try science. All right, Jake said, standing up and stretching like he was getting ready for a light morning jog instead of interstellar warfare. I guess we should probably do something about this Dominion Empire situation before it gets out of hand. Commander Vex, who had been quietly having what could only be described as a species-wide existential crisis, perked up nervously. You have a plan, Captain? Plan's a strong word. I was thinking more like an approach. Emma, how's the fleet looking? Lieutenant Rodriguez's hologram flickered with barely contained excitement. Oh, Captain, you're going to love this. Remember how you said we should make our ships look less intimidating? Well, mission accomplished. The Terran defense fleet currently looks like a collection of flying garbage dumps. The main display activated, showing the human fleet. If you squinted and had a really good imagination, you might have been able to identify them as spacecraft. They looked like someone had taken a junkyard, shot it into space, and then forgotten to tell it that it wasn't supposed to fly. President Thorne's mandibles clicked nervously. Those are your warships? Yep, Emma beamed. The aesthetic is called aggressive camouflage. The idea is that nobody expects flying scrap heaps to be carrying planet-busting weaponry. Planet-busting? Dr. Kelpin whispered. Oh, that's just marketing speak, Jake said dismissively. We prefer aggressive terrain modification. Admiral Zephyr's crystalline form had gone completely transparent, which was either a sign of deep thought or impending structural failure. Captain Morrison, perhaps you could explain your tactical approach? Sure. It's pretty simple, really. We're going to find the Dominion fleet, introduce ourselves politely, and ask them to please stop conquering everyone. If they refuse? Jake's expression didn't change, but somehow the temperature in the room dropped by several degrees. Then we'll demonstrate why humans prefer diplomacy. The first engagement happened 3 hours later, in the Kepler system, where a Dominion battle group was in the process of liberating a peaceful mining colony. The human ships approached at a leisurely pace, looking for all the world like lost cargo vessels. Emperor Kraxx himself monitored the engagement from his flagship, the inevitable Conquest. His 4 eyes tracked the human vessels with the kind of attention usually reserved for particularly interesting insects. These are the humans the surviving fleet spoke of? He asked his tactical officer. They look like debris. My Emperor. Our sensors are having difficulty getting accurate readings on their capabilities. The ships appear to be constructed from random materials and held together by... Is that duct tape? Irrelevant. Signal the fleet to dispose of them quickly. I have 3 more systems to conquer before dinner. The Dominion fleet opened fire with weapons that could vaporize mountains. Energy beams that bent space-time itself lanced toward the human ships. And absolutely nothing happened. The human vessels continued their approach, apparently unaware that they should have been reduced to their component atoms. One of them even seemed to be broadcasting what sounded like relaxing jazz music. Tactical officer. Emperor Kraxx asked slowly. Why are those ships still intact? I don't know, my Emperor. Our weapons struck them directly. The energy signatures confirm successful targeting, but they appear to be completely unaffected. Jake's voice crackled across all frequencies, sounding like he was ordering coffee rather than addressing a hostile alien fleet. Hey there, Dominion fleet. This is Captain Morrison of the Terran Defense Force. We're here about the whole Conquest thing. Would you mind terribly if we had a quick chat? Emperor Kraxx activated his communications array, his voice booming with imperial authority. Human vessel, you will surrender immediately or be destroyed. The Dominion Empire does not negotiate with primitive species. Primitive? Ouch. Jake sounded genuinely hurt. That's not very nice. Emma, they called us primitive. Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice joined the channel, and she was definitely not ordering coffee. They said what now? Captain, permission to demonstrate the difference between primitive and just polite? Go ahead, Lieutenant. Nothing too dramatic, though. We're still in the introduction phase. What happened next would be debated by military strategists for generations, assuming any of them survive to have the debate. The human ships, which had been drifting along like space debris, suddenly weren't. They were everywhere at once, moving in patterns that made experienced tactical officers question their understanding of physics. The Dominion fleet's return fire hit nothing but empty space. Meanwhile, their own ships began experiencing what could generously be called technical difficulties. Weapons systems shut down. Navigation computers started displaying poetry instead of coordinates. Life support systems began playing what sounded like elevator music at volumes that made concentration impossible. What is happening to my fleet? Emperor Kraxx demanded. His tactical officer was staring at readings that made no sense. Sir, it appears the humans are reorganizing our technology. Reorganizing? They're not destroying our systems, my Emperor. They're improving them. Our weapons are more accurate, our shields are stronger, our engines are more efficient. But none of it will respond to our commands anymore. Jake's voice returned to the channel, still maddeningly casual. Sorry about that, folks. Our engineers get a little enthusiastic sometimes. Look, here's the thing. You've been going around conquering people, and that's really not cool. So we're going to have to ask you to stop. And if we refuse? Emperor Kraxx snarled. There was a pause. Then Jake sighed, and somehow that sigh contained more menace than all of the Emperor's threats combined. Well, then I guess we'll have to show you what humans can do when we're not being polite. Emperor Kraxx made what would later be remembered as the worst tactical decision in galactic history. Instead of cutting his losses and retreating, he decided to escalate. Human, he broadcast across all frequencies, his voice shaking with rage. You think your pathetic species can challenge the might of the Dominion Empire? I have weapons that can shatter star systems. Surrender now, or I will demonstrate them on your pathetic homeworld. The communication channel went quiet for exactly 17 seconds. When Jake's voice returned, it carried a tone that made veteran warriors across 3 sectors suddenly decide they had urgent business elsewhere. Did he just threaten Earth? Commander Vex, who had been watching the engagement from the safety of the Galactic Council ship, felt his species' equivalent of cold sweat. Captain Morrison, surely he doesn't mean. Oh, he means it. Jake's voice had lost all trace of casualness. For the first time since waking up, Captain Jake Morrison sounded genuinely annoyed. Emma, patch me through to the fleet. You got it, boss. All ships standing by. Attention, Terran Defense Fleet. The Dominion Emperor has just threatened Earth. I'm officially upgrading this situation from diplomatic outreach to teaching moment. There was a pause. Anyone object to showing these folks what happens when we stop being nice? The response from the human fleet was immediate and unanimous, a cheer that somehow managed to sound both excited and terrifying. Emma, what's our current operational capacity? We're running at about 12%, Captain. Standard peacetime configuration. Right. Let's bump that up to, 50%. Don't want to overdo it on the first demonstration. What happened next redefined several fundamental concepts in physics, warfare, and what constituted reasonable force in diplomatic negotiations. The human ships, which had looked like flying junkyards, suddenly revealed their true nature. The scrap metal fell away like a snake shedding its skin, revealing vessels that seemed to be built from crystallized starlight and solidified mathematics. They moved through space like thoughts through a dreaming mind, faster than light but somehow more elegant than mere speed. Emperor Kraxx watched his supposedly invincible fleet simply stop. Not destroyed, not damaged, just frozen in place like insects in amber. Tactical report. He screamed. Sir, our ships are intact, but they're not responding. It's as if space itself has decided they're not allowed to move. Impossible. Jake's voice cut through the chaos, calm and conversational once again. Emperor Kraxx, we've temporarily suspended your fleet's relationship with the local space-time continuum. Don't worry, they're perfectly safe. We just thought you might like to see what 50% of human military capability looks like. One of the human ships approached the inevitable conquest. As it drew closer, Emperor Kraxx realized that what he was looking at wasn't a ship at all, but a mathematical equation that had decided to become matter. It was beautiful, terrifying, and completely impossible. This isn't real, the Emperor whispered. Your species was using chemical rockets a few centuries ago. Oh, that? Jake chuckled. That was just us playing around. We've had faster-than-light travel for about as long as we've had fire. We just thought it was rude to mention it. Most species seem so proud of their technological achievements, and we didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings. The human ship extended what might generously be called a docking tube, but which looked more like controlled lightning. Emperor Kraxx found himself involuntarily transported to what appeared to be a perfectly normal human living room, complete with comfortable furniture and the smell of fresh coffee. Jake was there, wearing a bathrobe and holding a mug that said Galaxy's okay as Space Captain. He looked exactly like what he was, a slightly sleepy human who'd been interrupted during his morning routine. Have a seat, Emperor. Coffee? Kraxx, whose species had conquered half the galaxy through superior firepower and tactical brilliance, found himself sitting in an overstuffed armchair and accepting a cup of coffee that was somehow perfectly suited to his alien physiology. How? Was all he managed to say. How what? The teleportation? The coffee? The part where we stopped your entire fleet without firing a shot? Jake settled into his own chair. Pick your question. All of it. Jake took a sip of coffee and sighed contentedly. Well, the short version is that humans have. They've been holding back. A lot. See, we figured out pretty early that when you're the apex predator, you have to be really careful not to accidentally step on everybody else. Apex predator? Kraxx laughed bitterly. Your species hasn't even left your home galaxy. Haven't we? Jake smiled. Emperor, how many galaxies do you think there are in this local cluster? The question was so random that Kraxx answered automatically. 17, within feasible travel distance. And how many of those galaxies have you explored? 3, counting this one. Jake's smile widened. We've been to all 17, plus about 1,000 others. We just didn't mention it because, well, there wasn't really any reason to. The Emperor stared at him. That's impossible. We would have detected evidence of your expansion. Would you? We're pretty good at not leaving footprints when we don't want to. Jake leaned back in his chair. Tell me, Emperor, what do you think humans do when we're not being observed? Before Kraxx could answer, the living room's window showed a view of space that shouldn't have been possible. Galaxies wheeled by like fireflies. Star systems rearranged themselves into more aesthetically pleasing patterns, and what appeared to be a cosmic construction project involving the careful relocation of several black holes was proceeding in the background. We garden, Jake said simply. The universe is a pretty big place, and it takes a lot of maintenance to keep everything running smoothly. Species evolving, stars burning at the right rates, galaxies not bumping into each other awkwardly. It's a full-time job, really. Emperor Kraxx felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood, wonder mixed with absolute terror. You're saying humans are, what, the gardeners of reality? Among other things. We're also the guys who make sure nobody accidentally breaks the universe while we're not looking. Jake's expression became serious. Which brings us to your little conquest hobby, Emperor. See, when you start blowing up civilizations and threatening to destroy star systems, you're messing with our garden. And we really don't like it when people mess with our garden. The view outside shifted, showing the Dominion fleet still frozen in space, but now surrounded by ships that made the earlier human vessels look like toys. These weren't even ships in any recognizable sense, but rather ideas about what ships might be if they weren't limited by trivial concerns like physics. 50%, Jake said conversationally. Want to see what happens at 100%. Emperor Kraxx looked at the impossible ships, at the casual manipulation of reality, at the humans sitting across from him in a bathrobe who apparently treated the restructuring of galactic civilization like a minor household chore. For the first time in his long career of conquest, the Emperor of the Dominion Empire made a wise decision. I surrender. Nah. Smart choice. Emma, you can power down the reality adjusters. Crisis over. Oh, really? I was just getting warmed up. Save it for next time. Lieutenant, I'm sure someone else will threaten to destroy a planet eventually. 3 weeks later, the Galactic Council chamber had been redecorated. It still looked like the result of 17 species trying to agree on interior design, but now it somehow worked. The colors complemented each other, the lighting was perfect for every type of vision, and the acoustics were so good that even whispered conversations could be heard clearly by beings whose hearing operated on entirely different principles. Nobody asked how this had happened. They were learning not to ask questions when humans were involved. President Thorne called the session to order with considerably more confidence than he'd had a month ago. The Council recognizes Captain Morrison for his final report on the Dominion situation. Jake stood up, looking exactly as relaxed as he had when this whole thing started. Thanks, President Thorne. Happy to report that Emperor Kraxx has agreed to discontinue his conquest hobby. He's actually taken up gardening now, which seems like a much healthier outlet for his territorial instincts. Dr. Kelpin raised a tentacle nervously. Captain, what exactly did you do to change his mind? Oh, we just had a conversation. Showed him a few things, explained the situation from a human perspective. Turns out he's actually pretty reasonable once you get past all the conquering and the dramatic speeches. Admiral Zephyr's crystalline form flickered with curiosity. And the Dominion fleet? Reassigned to infrastructure projects. Turns out those planet-cracking weapons are great for asteroid mining, and their tactical AI makes excellent traffic controllers. Who knew? The council members exchanged glances. Over the past 3 weeks, they'd watched the Dominion Empire transform from a galactic threat into a surprisingly efficient civil engineering organization. Kraxx himself had become an enthusiastic proponent of sustainable agricultural practices, though nobody was entirely sure how that had happened. Captain, President Thorne said carefully, the Council has been discussing humanity's role in galactic affairs. Given your capabilities, we were wondering if you might consider a more formal position as peacekeepers? Jake looked thoughtful. Peacekeepers? That sounds like a lot of work. Not necessarily, Dr. Kelpin said quickly. Perhaps more of a consultative role? Species could bring their disputes to human mediators before they escalate to warfare. Would this involve a lot of meetings? We could minimize the bureaucracy, President Thorne assured him. And paperwork? Digital filing systems only. Jake nodded slowly. I suppose that could work. Though I should probably mention that humans work best when we're not micromanaged. We prefer the call us if something's actually threatening approach to galactic security. Define actually threatening? Admiral Zephyr requested. Oh, you know, reality-ending scenarios, universe collapsing paradoxes, that sort of thing. The usual Tuesday morning problems. Jake paused. Actually, speaking of which, we should probably establish some guidelines so people know when to call us and when to handle things themselves. Commander Vex, who had become something of a human behavior specialist over the past month, pulled up a holographic document. We've drafted something called the Human Incident Prevention Protocol. The document appeared in the center of the chamber, and the council members read through it with growing amusement and terror. Human Incident Prevention Protocol. Try diplomacy first. If diplomacy fails, try science. If science fails, call the humans. If humans seem annoyed, evacuate the local star system. If humans stop being polite, evacuate the local galaxy. If humans want to see what happens at 100%. Update your will and make peace with your gods. Jake reviewed the protocol with obvious satisfaction. Yeah, that looks about right. Though you might want to add something about not threatening Earth. We get really cranky when people threaten Earth. Noted. President Thorne said, making a mental note to broadcast that particular warning to every species in known space. Well then, Jake said, stretching and yawning. If we're all set here, I think I'll head back to cryo-sleep. Wake me if something genuinely catastrophic happens, or if someone figures out how to make coffee that doesn't require getting out of bed. As Jake headed toward the door, an emergency alert chimed through the chamber. The main display activated, showing a massive fleet of unknown vessels emerging from what appeared to be a crack in reality itself. Council ships. This is Fleet Admiral Nexus of the Void Collective. We have come to harvest this galaxy's life energy for our cosmic engines. Resistance is futile. Surrender is inevitable. Your civilizations will be consumed. The chamber fell silent except for the sound of Jake's footsteps as he continued walking toward the exit. Captain? President Thorne called out nervously. Jake paused at the door, his cryopod already cycling open in the next room. Without turning around, he called out in a voice that was already getting drowsy, handle it yourselves. I'm sure you'll figure something out. The door closed behind him with a soft hiss. Commander Vex looked at the massive invasion fleet on the display, then at the closed door, then back at the fleet. Should we wake him up? President Thorne consulted the Human Incident Prevention Protocol. Well, they haven't threatened Earth specifically, and they haven't made Captain Morrison actually annoyed yet. Dr. Kelpin's tentacles writhed nervously. But they're planning to harvest all life in the galaxy. Yes, but they just got here. Protocol says we should try diplomacy first. Admiral Zephyr's crystalline form brightened with sudden inspiration. Wait. The protocol also says if science fails, call the humans. But what if we skip straight to the science part? The council members looked at each other, then at the various pieces of impossible technology that had been left around the chamber as a result of Jake's casual problem-solving over the past month. I have an idea, Commander Vex said slowly. What if we just asked the technology to help? 30 minutes later, the Void Collective's invasion fleet found itself politely but firmly escorted to the edge of the galaxy by what appeared to be a small moon that had developed sentience and strong opinions about proper visitor etiquette. The Council never did figure out exactly how that had happened, but they decided not to wake Jake unless something was worse than interdimensional energy vampires with planet-eating spaceships. They were learning. In his cryopod, Captain Jake Morrison smiled in his sleep, dreaming of well-tended gardens and perfectly brewed coffee, while the universe continued its quiet work around him.